My mother chose my sister over me. So I revealed her true colors to everyone. My name is Jessica, and I grew up in a cozy, single-story home in a small town where everyone seemed to know each other's business. Despite the picturesque view of tree-lined streets and perfectly trimmed lawns, my childhood didn't feel quite so perfect. Most days, my mother and sister, Lyla, occupied the house like a secret club I could never quite join. They wore matching outfits, whispered inside jokes, and shared those special mother-daughter moments that I was certain existed only in fairy tales. The curtains were always drawn back, letting in as much sunlight as possible. My mother believed in bright living spaces, even if the emotional atmosphere was anything but. From an outsider's perspective, we might have seemed like a close-knit family. My mother, Marlene, was known around the neighborhood for her heartwarming smile and welcoming spirit. Neighbors complimented her freshly baked cookies and admired how she seemed to juggle motherly duties so effortlessly. Little did they know that behind closed doors, she watched Lyla's every move with pride and adoration while I was treated like a stray cat who had wandered in from the street. She would beam at Lyla's latest dance recital performance, plan elaborate birthday parties for her, and even give her extravagant just because gifts. Meanwhile, my accomplishments, academically or socially, rarely stirred even a ripple of excitement. To be fair, it wasn't always overt cruelty toward me. My mother just had a special sparkle in her eyes reserved for Lyla, an unspoken message that everything my sister did was extraordinary. I wouldn't call it jealousy, I felt, at least not at first. It was more like confusion and a quiet sadness that clung to me day after day. Whenever I tried to reach out or get her attention, her responses, though polite, felt rote and distant. "That's nice, Addie," she'd say with a quick pat on my shoulder before rushing off to help Lyla prepare for her next big event. Over time, my frustration grew, morphing into resentment that threatened to overshadow all the love I tried to hold on to for my mother. Outside of our home, the world was a different place for me. At school, I was recognized as a diligent student who excelled in art class. My teacher saw promise in my sketches, praising my creative eye and unique perspective. My classmates occasionally teased me for being quiet and introspective, but it never felt malicious. I always felt safer there, in the mix of swirling chalk dust and half-finished paintings, than I did in my living room, where I was perpetually overshadowed by Lyla's achievements. My father wasn't absent, but he worked long hours, commuting to a nearby city. By the time he got home, he was drained and had little energy left. He'd greet us with a tired smile and a kiss on the forehead, ask how our day went, and then retreat to his study to get lost in paperwork. He often relied on my mother to keep him updated about the details of our lives. And of course, her updates usually revolved around Lyla's big wins. There were early signs of tension, occasional spats about me wanting more freedom or a bit of recognition, but my mother always brushed them off. "We'll talk later, Addie," she'd say. "Lyla needs me right now." Later never came. The tension grew, weaving itself into our daily routine, a constant hum I couldn't silence. I still remember feeling a strange ache in my chest every time I heard her footsteps approach Lyla's door and not mine. Little by little, I began to feel like a guest in my own home, longing for a bond one was never quite sure existed. If someone had asked me years ago to describe my mother, Marlene, I would have spoken first about her outward charm. She was the kind of person who could strike up a conversation in the checkout line and walk away with a new friend. But underneath that warm exterior lay an unwavering focus on Lyla. It wasn't an obsession so much as a belief that Lyla was destined for greatness, one that required every ounce of Marlene's emotional energy to nurture. Any time my mother addressed me, it felt like she was merely doing her duty, a formality that came with having a second child. The sparkle in her eye that she showed Lyla was conspicuously absent. Lyla, on the other hand, had grown comfortable in the spotlight. She thrived on my mother's praise and learned how to keep it flowing, whether through new performances, good grades, or casual, sweet gestures that guaranteed Marlene's approval. Despite her star status at home, Lyla wasn't outright mean, yet it was clear she enjoyed the privilege. She rarely questioned why our mother treated me differently, and I sometimes wondered if she even noticed. My father, whose name was Gregory, was a quiet man by nature. He had grown up in a large family where keeping your head down was often safer than stirring up trouble. Perhaps out of habit or exhaustion, he allowed my mother to dominate the household dynamic. When I was younger, I believed he was simply too busy to see how things were unfolding, but as I grew older, I noticed subtle signs of unease in his eyes whenever tension arose. He knew something was off, but never found the resolve to intervene. We had a small extended family, most of whom lived out of town. Holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas were some of the few times we saw them. During these gatherings, Marlene dialed up her perfect family image to the maximum, her best tableware came out, she baked pies from scratch, and she gushed to relatives about Lyla's achievements. In those rare moments, she'd make a small remark about me, something generic like Addie's doing well in school, as though my entire existence could be summed up in one polite sentence. Over the years, my self-esteem became fragile. I started to believe that maybe I wasn't special enough to warrant the kind of love Lyla received. Art became my sanctuary. I'd spend hours sketching scenes from nature or portraits of strangers I saw in magazines. Each stroke of the pencil offered an escape from the doubts that gnawed at me. Sometimes, I fantasized about running away to a city where no one knew me, where I could redefine myself without my mother's dismissive gaze hovering over my shoulder. Even so, a part of me still yearned for acceptance. Late at night, when the house was silent, I'd imagine a scenario where Marlene would see my artwork and suddenly understand the depth of my feelings. I'd picture her apologizing for all the years of neglect. But the next morning, I'd wake up to the same old dynamic. Lyla was the star, and I was the afterthought. That unbalanced attention shaped each of us in different ways. Lyla became confident, maybe even a bit entitled, while I learned to blend into the background, unsure when or if my voice mattered. Deep down, I realized that the family dynamic was dangerously off-kilter, but I had no idea how much worse it could get, or how drastically I'd have to act to expose the truth of my mother's favoritism. The first real crack in our already fragile household came during one of Lyla's high-stakes dance competitions. She had worked for months on a challenging routine, and my mother was beside herself with excitement. She fussed over every detail, Lyla's costume, her makeup, and even how they would present themselves to the judges and other parents. Meanwhile, I had just been accepted into a local youth art exhibition, an opportunity I'd been dreaming of for years. Rather than celebrate this milestone, my mother saw it as an inconvenience. "Addie, can't you move the date of your show?" she asked, voice dripping with impatience. "It's the same weekend as Lyla's competition. You know how important this is for her." I stared at her, stunned. "Mom, it's an exhibition. The dates are set, I can't just reschedule it because of Lyla's dance. This is my chance to get my artwork noticed." She sighed heavily as though I were a stubborn child refusing to share my toys. "Well, I can't be in two places at once. Lyla needs me at the competition. It would be nice if you could be understanding." I swallowed the lump in my throat, a familiar sensation that came whenever my achievements were brushed aside. "I understand Lyla's event is important, but this exhibit is a big deal for me. I've been preparing for months." She waved me off. "I don't have time for this right now, Addie." Her dismissal cut deeper than usual. I tried talking to Gregory about it, but he simply looked worn down. "Your mother's got a point," he said, though with clear discomfort. "It's a big day for Lyla." I spent the weekend of my art exhibition surrounded by colorful paintings, sculptures, and hopeful young artists, all brimming with excitement about their futures. I hung my sketches on the walls of the gallery, a small part of me hoping my mother would walk in and surprise me. She never did. Instead, she texted me a single line, "Good luck, sweetie. Sorry I couldn't be there." The resentment that had been building in my heart started to curdle into bitterness. When Lyla's competition ended and she secured second place, no small feat, my mother threw a party at our house. She invited neighbors, friends, and even a couple of Lyla's dance instructors. My father grilled burgers in the backyard, and fairy lights sparkled as the sun went down. Everyone was in a celebratory mood, except me. I felt invisible, drifting from one conversation to another, hearing repeated praise for Lyla's grace and hard work. Not a single person brought up my art exhibition. A week later, a second incident pushed me closer to my breaking point. I discovered that an educational grant I'd been eyeing for an advanced art program had specific income requirements. Since Gregory's salary was borderline too high, I needed documentation explaining my finances. While rummaging through family documents, I found receipts for Lyla's dance training, outfits, and even private lessons costing thousands of dollars. My parents were pouring a fortune into her future. Meanwhile, the idea of supporting my art endeavors seemed like an afterthought, if it crossed their minds at all. Feeling emboldened by my frustration, I confronted my mother. "Do you realize how much money you're spending on Lyla? It's insane. And here I am, struggling to find a way to pay for a program that could help me grow." Marlene frowned as though confused by my outrage. You know Lyla's talent could take her far. These expenses are investments in her future. Investments, I echoed, my temper flaring. What about my future, Mom? Or is the only future you care about Lyla's? She crossed her arms. Don't make this into a competition, Addie. You have your art. Lyla has her dance. We're just helping her where we can. But you're not helping me, I fired back, voice trembling. I can't even get you to show up for one exhibition. Do you think that doesn't hurt? You don't think it's obvious to everyone else? My mother's face hardened, a telltale sign that she was done listening. I'm not discussing this further, she said curtly. Don't you have your responsibilities to take care of? This cold dismissal stung like a fresh wound. More than that, it made me realize something crucial: my mother was never going to change on her own. She was too invested in Lyla's narrative. If I wanted to be seen, truly seen, by the people around us, I might have to go to extremes. The final straw was yet another gathering for Lyla's dance achievements, this time a small dinner celebration. As we sat around the table, my mother went on and on about how she planned to enroll Lyla in a prestigious dance academy. She even hinted at taking out a loan to fund it. I sat there, silent, every cell in my body screaming that this was unfair. But I'd already learned the hard way: nobody in my family wanted to hear about my frustrations. They were perfectly content to let Lyla be the star of every show. Little did they know, I'd been quietly gathering all the evidence I needed to show the world how skewed my mother's priorities were. I might not have had the loudest voice in the family, but I was about to make a move that no one would see coming. And once I did, there'd be no going back. I'd spent weeks planning exactly how to reveal the depths of my mother's favoritism, carefully piecing together every instance of her neglect toward me and disproportionate devotion to Lyla. The seed of my plans sprouted one night when I overheard my mother talking with my father in hushed tones. She was making arrangements for yet another celebration of Lyla's, this time to announce her official enrollment in the prestigious dance academy. That was my moment. If she wanted a grand spectacle for Lyla, she would get it. But this time I'd be stealing the spotlight. I reached out to my aunt, Carla, my father's sister. She lived a few states away and rarely visited, but she was one of the only people in the family who seemed to sense that something was amiss. When I told her about what had been happening, how my mother dismissed my art aspirations and funneled all resources into Lyla's dance, Carla's sigh echoed her frustration. I've had my suspicions for a long time, Addie, she said gently. And I'm sorry you've had to go through this alone. Are you sure you're ready for the fallout that will come with exposing all of this? I paused, my heart racing. I am. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Aunt Carla offered her support, and even suggested she might be able to come into town for Lyla's event. If you need backup, I'll be there, she promised. The night of the celebration arrived, and the house looked like it was set for a formal gala rather than a family gathering. Floral arrangements covered every surface, and a large banner proclaiming "Congratulations, Lyla," hung across the living room wall in shimmering letters. Relatives, neighbors, and even Lyla's dance instructors milled about, sipping sparkling cider and nibbling on hors d'oeuvres that my mother had painstakingly prepared. I hovered at the edge of the crowd, camera in hand. With shaky fingers, I scrolled through the photos I'd collected, pictures of me at my empty art exhibition, my mother's text message telling me she couldn't attend, and receipts showing the exorbitant costs for Lyla's training. I had even taken screenshots of emails in which my mother declined any opportunity related to my art, often citing family obligations. Piece by incriminating piece, I had built a timeline that left no doubt about her blatant favoritism. As the evening wore on, my mother finally stepped to the center of the room, a radiant smile lighting her face. She clinked her glass of cider with a spoon to gather everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice quivering slightly with excitement. "As many of you know, Lyla has been accepted into an elite dance academy that could shape her entire future. We're here to celebrate all her hard work and, of course, the bright road that lies ahead." Applause erupted. Lyla stood by Marlene's side, cheeks flushed with pride. My father looked on with a wistful half-smile. He was likely proud but also uneasy. Then, right on cue, Aunt Carla entered through the front door, quietly making her way behind the assembled guests. My mother continued, "I'd like to propose a toast to Lyla's success. May you soar high." "I have something to add," I interjected, stepping forward. My voice shook a little, but I forced myself to speak clearly. If we're celebrating achievements, maybe we can celebrate a few others in this family, too. Marlene glanced at me with a hint of annoyance. Addie, ow isn't real time. I lifted my phone. Mom, when is the time? Because it certainly wasn't at my art exhibition or any of the events I've tried to invite you to. So maybe it's time I show everyone what you've chosen to ignore. A hush fell over the crowd. Even Lyla's bright expression dimmed, confusion clouding her features. The tension in the room felt tangible, like a cord pulled taut, ready to snap. My finger tapped the screen, and a series of photographs appeared on the large TV screen in our living room, thanks to a wireless connection I'd set up beforehand. The first slide showed me alone at the art gallery, standing in front of my sketches with a forced smile, with family in sight. The caption beneath it read, "She was too busy helping Lyla." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the guests. My mother's face paled, eyes darting from the screen to the crowd. "You never had time for anything I did, Mom," I said, turning to face her. "You poured every ounce of energy and money into Lyla's dance career, to the point of ignoring my successes and needs. And you made it seem like I should just accept it because that's how things are done in this family." The slides advanced, showing proof of the thousands spent on Lyla's lessons, costumes, and travel costs, as well as the repeated rejections of my requests, class supplies, new art materials, or simply emotional support. Each piece of evidence laid bare the imbalance. The room buzzed with shock, disbelief, and uneasy shuffling feet. "Addie," my mother snapped, her face flushing. "Turn that off. You have no right." "No, right?" I echoed, my voice shaking with emotion. "I'm your daughter, too. I have every right to demand to be seen. I'm sick of feeling like a second-class citizen in my own home." Tears pooled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness anymore, they were fueled by the pent-up rage and heartbreak that had been festering for years. My mother's guests looked around uncomfortably, some moving toward the door. A few, including Aunt Carla, stepped closer to me, offering silent support. It was then that Lyla suddenly broke from her mother's side. "Addie, I had no idea it was this bad. I thought you were fine doing your own thing, that you liked being on your own." I locked eyes with my sister, searching for any trace of insincerity. Instead, I found genuine bewilderment. She had been pampered her whole life, so why would she question it? "I'm not blaming you, Lyla," I said, voice softer now. "I'm blaming the person who should have known better. Who should have made sure both her daughters felt supported." My mother stood frozen. When she finally spoke, her voice was tinged with desperation. "You don't understand, Addie. Lyla needed more help. Art isn't," she stopped short, catching herself. We were doing what was best for the family." "Don't insult my intelligence," I fired back, tears threatening to spill. "This was never about the family. It was about living through Lyla's achievements, about making her into the star you always wanted to be." My words struck home. A few guests stirred, shifting their gaze to Marlene with disapproval. Aunt Carla finally stepped forward, putting a comforting arm around my shoulder. "Marlene, you've let this go too far," she said gently but firmly. "Addie deserves an apology, more than that, she deserves a chance to chase her dreams, just like Lyla." The silence that followed seemed endless. My father looked mortified but didn't speak a word, his gaze fixed on the floor. The reality of my mother's favoritism was laid out for everyone to see, and there was no taking it back. In a subdued voice, Marlene turned to me. "Addie, I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I interjected, letting the tears flow freely now. "You hurt me every day. You treated me like an afterthought. This needs to change. Right now." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The carefully curated image she had maintained for years was shattered, and she stood in the wreckage of her own making. The guests began to disperse awkwardly, uncertain how to respond. Lyla walked over and silently wrapped her arms around me in a tentative hug, and for the first time in ages, I felt a genuine connection with my sister. In that chaotic blend of tension, guilt, and raw emotion, one thing was clear: I was no longer invisible. My mother's true colors had been revealed to everyone in that room, and no matter what happened next, I knew that my life, and our family, would never be the same again. The days following the explosive confrontation felt like treading through a minefield of emotions. On the one hand, the weight on my chest had lightened, I'd finally let the truth spill out, and there was a strange sort of relief in no longer carrying around that secret bitterness. But on the other hand, I was left with the wreckage of my family's facade. My mother no longer swept around the house in her usual whirl of planning and doting on Lyla. Instead, she was withdrawn, speaking only when necessary. Occasionally, I'd catch her glancing at me as if she wanted to say something, but she never found the words. My father tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. He'd ask how my day was going or if I needed anything for my artwork, though his tone suggested he was tiptoeing around me as if my anger might detonate again at the slightest provocation. It took me by surprise when he quietly said one evening, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, Addie." His eyes were filled with regret, but at least there was something genuine there, a recognition that he had failed to intervene when it mattered most. In his subdued way, it was an admission of guilt. Lyla's behavior shifted significantly. Gone was the breezy confidence that came with being the favored child. She tiptoed around me at first, unsure how to reconnect or even if it was possible. Then, one afternoon, she knocked on my bedroom door. When I opened it, she stood there holding a small wrapped gift, a sketchbook with my name printed on the cover in metallic letters. I know it doesn't make up for anything," she said, eyes lowered. "But I saw it at an art store, and I thought of you." Her gesture softened something in me that had been hardened for years. I invited her in, and for the first time, we had a real conversation, one that didn't revolve around her dance or my silent resentments. Lyla admitted she had been unaware of the extent of our mother's favoritism. "I thought you liked being on your own," she confessed. "Mom always said you preferred solitude and that I needed her more." "Of course, I liked my space," I responded, thumbing through the crisp blank pages of the sketchbook. "But that doesn't mean I wanted to be abandoned." She nodded, tears in her eyes. We spent the rest of the evening talking about our childhood, the small moments we'd never shared because our mother had built an invisible wall between us. Lyla even apologized for never inviting me to her dance recitals, admitting she had assumed I wasn't interested. It was a messy, emotional conversation but also a necessary one. For the first time, we felt like real sisters. Meanwhile, Aunt Carla became an unexpected ally. She extended her stay in town and spent time with me at the local art gallery, discussing potential options for pursuing art grants or scholarships. "I can't fix your relationship with Marlene," she said gently. "But I can help you move forward." One evening, Carla managed to corner my mother in the kitchen. I overheard snippets of their heated discussion, something about regrets, responsibility, and the long-term damage of parental neglect. My mother's voice was shaky and defensive. "You don't understand, Carla. I was just trying to give Lyla the best." "And Addie," she never spoke up. Carla's response was muffled, but I caught the final part, "She's your daughter. It was your job to make sure she felt loved and supported, whether she spoke up or not." That night, my mother knocked softly on my bedroom door, an echo of Lyla's earlier gesture. She came in wearing an expression I'd never seen before, vulnerability. "May I sit?" she asked, voice wavering. I nodded, unsure what to expect. For a few moments, we just looked at each other in the warm glow of the bedside lamp. Then she swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she began, tears already gathering in her eyes. "I got so wrapped up in making Lyla a star that I guess I forgot to see you, Addie. I never intended to make you feel unwanted." A wave of conflicting emotions hit me, relief, anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope. "I don't know if I can just forgive and forget," I admitted, tears stinging my own eyes. "You've hurt me so many times." She nodded as though she couldn't expect any less. "I'm not asking you to. But I want a chance to do better. To be a mother to both of my daughters." In that moment, I realized that while I might not be able to heal years of pain overnight, I could take a small step toward the possibility of a new beginning. "I need time," I said. She reached for my hand, and for once, I didn't pull away. "Take as much time as you need," she whispered. And so, the house that had once felt suffocating was now filled with cautious hope. The aftermath of the confrontation was messy, feelings were raw, trust was fragile, but at least now there was dialogue. At least now, there was a path toward rebuilding relationships that had once seemed irreparably broken. Weeks turned into months, and while the road to mending our relationships wasn't simple, small changes became noticeable. My mother, Marlene, no longer spent every spare moment hovering over Lyla's dance schedule. She asked about my art and even offered to help me research scholarships. Though I remained guarded, old wounds take time to heal, I couldn't deny feeling a spark of cautious optimism. Lyla, too, made an effort to include me in her life, inviting me to watch her practice or just hang out and chat. Sometimes, I said yes, other times, I needed space, but I appreciated the gesture. A pivotal turning point arrived when I received an invitation to exhibit at a regional art showcase. Normally, I would have quietly prepared and attended on my own, expecting minimal support. Instead, Marlene insisted on helping me set up my booth while Gregory handled the logistics of transporting my framed pieces. Even Lyla pitched in, double-checking the lighting and arrangement of my artwork. Throughout the day, I found it surreal that my family, once so fractured, was banding together to support me. When the event finally opened to the public, I looked across the bustling gallery to see them watching my every move, genuine pride illuminating their faces. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. Nothing could erase the years of pain in an instant, and I didn't expect it to. But seeing my mother beam at my work, her voice filled with admiration as she introduced me to visitors, felt like a moment I'd waited an eternity for. We weren't miraculously healed, but the willingness to recognize each other's worth was a significant step forward. We still had difficult conversations, moments where resentment flared, and trust wavered. Yet the family I once believed to be hopelessly fixated on Lyla's success was gradually becoming one where each member's dreams could coexist. I grew to trust them again, little by little, and in return, they respected the boundaries I set. In the end, our family didn't dissolve under the weight of ugly truths, it transformed. The cracks from our old life never disappeared entirely, but they became the foundation for a more honest, balanced relationship. And, as I gently wrapped up my artwork at that regional showcase, I realized that exposing my mother's favoritism wasn't just about revealing her flaws, it was about giving us all a second chance at being a real family. Thank you for listening to my story, a journey that took me from silent frustration to a raw, emotional confrontation and finally toward a path of healing. If you've ever felt overlooked or compared in your family, remember that you deserve to be heard. Sometimes, speaking up is the only way to break free of the shadows and let your light shine. If this story resonates with you, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. We share real-life family dramas and personal stories that empower you to stand your ground. Feel free to drop a comment below. Have you ever faced favoritism or felt like the forgotten child? How did you cope? Your experiences might help someone else feel less alone. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your voice and fight for the love and respect you deserve. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and keep believing in your worth.